Hey everybody, it's Eric here and welcome to the next video in my multi-part video series called Your Deceptive Mind. Now last week I spoke to you guys about the 3 different brains in your body, and I invited you to consider that when you are unable to think critically, it's because there was a lack of synchronization between the 3 brains. I wanted to speak a little bit more about critical thinking today, and I wanted to start off by stating that yes, I do understand that critical thinking skills lie in the neocortex developed human brain. It makes perfect sense because it's what separates us humans from animals. But I still wanted you guys to separate the term critical thinking from the neocortex because one, I don't believe that you can access those critical thinking skills without the 3 brains being in balance, but more importantly, it's really easy to mistake critical thinking with rationalizing, and that's what our developed human brain is really good at doing, is rationalizing our behavior. In fact, the more intelligent you are, the more prone you are to hyper-rationalizing. This is something that's been shown in research studies. Now you may ask, how exactly are those 2 terms different? In fact, in today's language, isn't rationalizing and critical thinking synonymous with each other? And don't we call an individual who approaches a situation in a well thought out manner to be a rational human being? I think the best way to show you guys why I want you to separate the 2 terms is to look at critical thinking from the language of logic, from the field of study of logic. And in logic, it divides critical thinking into reasoning versus rationalizing. And the way that they define rationalizing is when somebody starts off with a conclusion and then finds evidence to support and justify that conclusion. This can be illustrated by that example I gave you guys last week with how I react when I'm really hungry. How I get attached to this idea that I have the right to be angry because I'm hungry and they're not providing the service that's required. And then I start providing lots of evidence of why it's okay for me to exhibit that poor behavior, especially in the face of my criticizers. Now, this process is something that human beings do quite often, and the reason why we do this is because we want to avoid something called cognitive dissonance. And as I've described in a previous video, cognitive dissonance is when you have 2 belief systems that clash with each other. And when you have 2 belief systems that clash with each other, it causes like a mental paradox, a psychological problem that you need to resolve straight away. And the way we do this is by basically cherry-picking evidence and to support our behavior or our conclusion. And the reason why we cherry pick evidence rather than see the body of evidence as a whole is because our brain is also prone to this certain error called confirmation bias. And what confirmation bias is basically when you're exposed to a certain situation or belief enough times, you start taking that belief, that perceived belief, to be actual reality. And to give you an example, imagine if you're somebody who's born into poverty and you've lived a really hard life of trials and tribulations, like somebody born in war-torn Syria. You'll start viewing the world and describing the world as a really difficult, hard world. But if you compare yourself to, say, a rich kid born into a really affluent family, they will describe the world as really easy with plenty of opportunity. And relating it back to my example, this is where I cherry pick evidence from my previous experience of other restaurants. With other restaurants, I've always gotten my food on time. I've always had great service. I watch these cooking shows like, you know, Hell's Kitchen and all that say that no, service is paramount, and there's no excuse. But if I was actually thinking critically, I'd be able to understand that on any Friday, Saturday night when it's really busy, all it takes is one incorrect ticket or one return plate of food for it to throw the whole kitchen out of whack. And when the whole kitchen is out of whack, all the timing is out of whack as well. And it's reasonable to understand that no matter how many Michelin stars your restaurant has, you're going to have a bad night. What makes it worse is that I've actually worked in the food industry before. I know how easy it is for the kitchen to go out of whack. So this is a clear example where I'm cherry picking evidence, where I'm attaching myself to this belief that's not really grounded in reality, because I know that any restaurant can have a bad day. I've experienced it myself. So in these moments, this is where people describe an individual as rationalizing their behavior. And this is exactly the reason why I'd rather use the term reasoning. And in the language of logic, reasoning is defined as when you start off with nothing, you look at the entire body of evidence, and then you filter it down into a conclusion. And this is perfectly illustrated by the scientific method. That's what research projects do. They look at all the different variables, they conduct the study, then look at what the outcomes are, and then provide a conclusion. They do not start off with a conclusion first and then pick out variables or pick out a research design to fit that conclusion. It's not even called science anymore after that. Now, I hope you guys can see why exactly I drew the parallel between the definition of reasoning as critical thinking, that starting off with nothingness, and also why when you sync the three brains together through deep breathing to achieve that state of groundedness so that you can access that particular skill. What exactly is that nothingness, that groundedness, that being that I keep speaking about? Anybody who's practiced meditation or yoga, or who's even just watched a movie and managed to empty their mind and be completely absorbed in the movie itself, will realize that when you empty your brain from thoughts, when you empty the internal dialogue, there is still a presence there. There's still a presence there, an intelligence there that still perceives the world, still understands what's going on, but it doesn't have any thought or feeling. And that, my friends, that being, that presence, is where critical thinking lies. It starts off with that nothingness that feels and thinks nothing but perceives everything. So, my friends, next time you feel really ungrounded or feel that you might be acting unresourcefully, take a couple of deep breaths and notice what happens when that internal dialogue and all the emotional energy that's flowing around dissipates. Notice and perceive that intelligence in your mind and realize that that's where the access to critical thinking really is. So my friends, until the next video. Hey everybody, it's Eric here, and today's... I do know that it's frontal lobe area, but I still wanted you guys to separate critical thinking from the neocortex, because first off, I believe that you can only draw out critical thinking when there is a synchronization between the three brains, but also there's a really not perceive, but not feel, sorry, but in your body. And I invited you to consider that when you're unable to employ your critical thinking skills, it's because